Hi, this is Little Dwarf, rambling incoherently into a microphone. This time I won't be playing a game, but instead I'll be talking about certain themes and plot elements from the Legacy of Kain series. Believe it or not, despite gaming being one of my favorite hobbies, I was only vaguely aware of the Legacy of Kain series' existence and have not played any of the games until very recently. But then I watched, by a complete accident, a compilation video of dialogue by Kain, one of the protagonist characters for the series, and I instantly fell in love with the way he was written and acted. He seemed almost like a Shakespearean character to me, a person in a grand play, reciting their lines with majesty and pride. So I immediately wanted to know more about him, and I played all of the Legacy of Kain games in release order, finishing not long ago with Defiance, and although I had my share of problems with certain elements of the gameplay, I was very impressed with the story, the characters and the voice acting of the games. And I was especially impressed with the character creation of Kain himself. His development throughout the series is pretty astounding, as the games skillfully change your perspective of him by presenting different sides of his experience in the world of Nosgoth. This video will contain spoilers for the Legacy of Kain series, so if you have not played the games yet, I urge you to do so. They are really worth it. Or if you would like to see a bit of how they play first, you may check my blind playthroughs linked in the description below. Now, Kain starts seemingly as a vain, arrogant noble, thinking of everyone in Nosgoth, be they fellow nobility, peasants or even kings, as lesser than himself. He has a bit of a cruel streak to him, waxing poetically about rape and pillaging.
The court of King Otmar, shades of my former existence, proud and self-absorbed, surrounded by all the finery of the realm, secure in their ignorance. As I walked among them, I smirked, thinking of the carnage befall them at the hands of the legions of the Nemesis, glorious flames, and the inevitable rape and pillage. Out of my way, peasant! The stench of the fields hangs over you like a pall.
The king says no one. He is in mourning for the princess.
He'll be in mourning for his kingdom soon, and he'll mourn for you even sooner if you don't get out of my way!
Ooh.
He is, frankly speaking, more than a bit of an asshole. And although as a fictional character he is still very interesting and downright cool in his assholery, he isn't a person you would earnestly like if you knew him for real. The first game concludes with Kain refusing to sacrifice his life to restore the dying lands of Nosgoth, instead choosing to rule with an iron bloody fist as an immortal vampire warlord feared by all.
I am the last pillar, the only survivor of the Circle of Nine. At my whim, the world will be healed or damned. At my whim. Once I embraced my powers, I realized that Vorador was correct. We are gods. Dark gods. And it is our duty to thin the herd.
At first, I saw that as a fiercely selfish act, a petty cowardly move to damn the whole world and then rule its ashes, and I very much think the game was built in a way that made what I felt and thought the intended player reaction.
This world is wrecked with cataclysms. The earth strains to shrug off the pestilence of Kain's parasitic empire. The fate of this world was preordained in an instant by a solitary man. Unwilling to martyr himself to restore Nosgoth's balance, Kain condemned the world to the decay you see. In that moment, the unraveling began. Now it is nearly played out. Nosgoth teeters on the brink of collapse. Its fragile balance cannot hold.
But then, as the series progresses, Kain seems to strangely mellow out. Instead of whimsically wondering about horrible atrocities being committed, he philosophically questions fate, destiny, free will, and his role in all of this. At first, in Soul Reaver 1, he is still projected as kind of villainous, seen through the eyes of Raziel, whom he cast into the abyss with no explanation, but even then, you can already see some part of his grand design yet unexplained, some references to prophecies and signs, and an overarching goal that seems to go far beyond Kain's personal plan.
Raziel. Kain. The abyss has been unkind. I am your creation, Kain. Now, as before, you criticize your own work. What have you done with my clan, degenerate? You have no right. What I have made, I can also destroy, child. Damn you, Kain! You are not God! This act of genocide is unconscionable! Conscience? You dare to speak to me of conscience? Only when you have felt the full gravity of choice should you dare question my judgment. Your lifespan is a flicker compared to the mass of doubt and regret that I have borne since Mortanius first turned me from the fight. To know the fate of the world hangs dependent on the advisedness of my every deed. Can you even begin to conceive what action you would take in my position? I would choose integrity, Kain. Look around you, Raziel. See what has become of our empire. Witness the end of an age. The clans scattered to the corners of Nosgoth. This place has outlasted its usefulness. As have you. The blade is vanquished. So it unfolds. And we are a step closer to our destinies. I swore I saw a glint of satisfaction in Kain's eye when the Soul Reaver was destroyed. I did not understand the game that Kain was playing. But I knew the finishing move.
And finally, as the series comes to a close, I personally started to see Kain as a downright tragic character. He was born afflicted by corruption, born out of Napraptor's rage and grief upon the death of his beloved Ariel. He was tainted at the moment of his birth by things outside of his control, and besides, as he was born in the moment of Ariel's death, he was marked as her successor as the Balance Guardian, and thus also marked for death. His death was required to restore the Pillar of Balance, to restore the supposed balance of the whole world of Nosgoth.
This is the sublime moment of our undoing, Raziel. The ineffable fulcrum upon which swings the entirety of our history. This is where all of Nosgoth is betrayed. In this instant, Ariel, the Balance Guardian, is murdered by dark forces bent on overthrowing the pillars. Her spirit is just now tearing free, lost in the ether, trying to find its way here. You have already seen how she comes to haunt these pillars.
Bound here by your refusal to die. You are the reason this land becomes diseased. As long as you remain alive, you condemn Nosgoth to an eternity of decay.
Be still, Raziel. See this. As Ariel dies, I am being born to take her place as Balance Guardian. Such is my destiny. My God. At the moment of my first cry, Ariel's beloved, the Guardian Napraptor, finds her corpse. Racked with grief and tormented by suspicions of treachery, Napraptor plunges into a madness which overflows and infects all of the Guardians who are symbiotically bound, including me. The repercussions of Ariel's assassination were expertly calculated. The entire circle descends into madness, and I am tainted at the moment of my birth, instantly rendered incapable of fulfilling the role destiny has prepared for me.
Shall I show you the same mercy you showed the rest of the circle, then? You blithely murdered them to restore their pillars, yet your hand faltered when it came to the final sacrifice. What makes you exempt, Kain? You're merely the last man standing. Why condemn me for simply carrying out what you hadn't the courage to do yourself?
He was required and expected to martyr himself in order to reverse events which he has not caused, to save a world he did not have a choice in damning in the first place. The characters in the game expected that of him, and I believe the player, at least at first, was conditioned to have expected that of him as well. I know I personally did. And it was not after I concluded Defiance, the last game in the series, and sat thinking for a while, that the full monstrosity of this requirement really hit me. Kain was born seemingly destined to die to quote-unquote save the world. That was seemingly, from certain points of view, the point of his existence from the moment he came to even live. He was destined to be born cursed, die, be raised as a vampire, slaughter the other mad members of the circle, and then, at the end of all of that, sacrifice his own existence for the sake of the world. Is it really that surprising that he said screw that to such a destiny?
I alone was spared the descent into madness, and Kain alone was spared the pain of death. When Nepraptor's poison seized Kain even in the safety of the womb, much more than just his destiny was lost. All of Nosgoth lost balance. Consider us now, both of us less than we once were. I, pure but insubstantial, and Kain, terribly real, but corrupted.
Your imprisonment here has deranged you, Spirit. You fixate on Kain because you believe he is the tether that binds you here. But we both know he is not the author of your agony. The pillars were subverted by dark forces, invited by the Guardians themselves. The more I learn of your circle, the more I see a tangle of nested manipulations.
Kain handed them their victory. They sought to topple the pillars, and he was their willing instrument.
Or was he their unwilling pawn? Would it blunt your wrath to know that Kain's dilemma was calculated to bring the pillars down, regardless of the choice he made? And that the devastation would have been even greater had he chosen the path you would prescribe for him?
You are a subtle, deceitful creature. But your clever arguments do not absolve Kain. He must die for the pillars to be restored. There is no other way.
Then consider this more ominous possibility. What if Kain's death does not restore the pillars? Consider that it may simply be too late, that this world may be beyond redemption, and that you may be bound here eternally.
I think it is really interesting how heroic stories condition us to see self-sacrifice as not only noble, but also borderline required for a hero. Sure, it is worthy of praise if he does it, and hopefully he will live on in legend. But it is also often presented as straight up wrong for him to refuse such a sacrifice. It is wrong for the hero to preserve their own life. After all, shouldn't he value the lives of others more than himself? But the question is, why exactly do we generally expect that of heroes? I think there are a couple reasons. First, there's just the fact that stories in general, especially the simple fairy tales we've all heard as kids, but also all the highly heroic folkloric tales of old, have kind of conditioned us to expect that. That is, simply speaking, what heroes do. They sacrifice themselves. In many stories they don't even question that requirement, it's just taken as an axiom for the story, and even in the stories where they do question it, the mark of the true hero is usually to rise to the occasion and go through with it, despite the doubts. And then there is the fact that the utilitarian approach to morality is pretty ingrained in the thinking of most people because it seems so naturally sensible. If one person has to die to save thousands, it is right for that person to die, right? After all, it is better for one man to perish than many, but for me, it's not that simple. What exact moral obligation is there to sacrifice oneself for others, especially in cases such as the one in Legacy of Kain, where you didn't even cause the disaster that requires the sacrifice in the first place? Don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking down self-sacrifice. I think it's noble, honorable and worthy of high praise, but I also think the implicit expectation of self-sacrifice that stories often place upon the hero is kind of sick. It is a logical and a moral absurdity to treat self-sacrifice as a requirement. It's to be commended when it happens, sure, but I don't think it should be expected. Every moment of your life there is someone else suffering and needing help. Everywhere you look, you could sacrifice yourself for someone else. I'm not saying that you can't or shouldn't, or you shouldn't be honored if you do, but I do think it is insane and cruel to expect that you do. What obligation does Kain have towards Nosgoth and its denizens? Why should he kill himself to save them exactly? He has been played for a pawn, his whole life controlled by forces outside of his knowledge and understanding. He didn't cause the world of Nosgoth to be corrupted. He shouldn't be expected to pay with his life to uncorrupted. Is Kain a vain asshole? Yeah, kinda, and that's why I love him as a character, if not as a person. But I think it is irrelevant. Even if he was the worst person that has ever lived, it would still be wrong to see it as his obligation to lay down his life to improve things for other denizens of Nosgoth, if he wasn't to blame for their shitty situation in the first place. I guess my stance ultimately can be tracked down to my pretty intense distaste for utilitarianism as a moral philosophy. From a utilitarian perspective, it is moral and required for Kain to sacrifice his life for others, simply because theirs is a greater number and thus a greater need. Indeed, it would also be moral and required to force Kain to sacrifice his life for others for the same reason. But for me, reducing human life to a number in a calculation is one of the most heinous acts that one can commit, and it opens the door to atrocities beyond count. If it is required that Kain lay down his life to save Nosgoth, surely it would also be required for 1,000 innocents to do the same, or for 10 of thousands, or 1,000,000, depending on how many they would save in turn. I personally prefer to see the value of a human life as uncalculable, and people as goals in themselves, rather than means to an end, no matter how supposedly noble or good that goal might be in the end. So even if Nosgoth is still damned by the end of the series, even if the decay of the pillars will ultimately doom it, I still think there is something weirdly triumphant about Kain refusing to lower himself to being a sacrificial animal, in him standing his ground and proudly asserting his right to continue to exist. Legacy of Kain has really caused me to re-examine the role of self-sacrifice in stories, the implicit expectations of it, and the burden of obligation we tend to place upon heroes, and that, among many other things, is why I'm glad I finally played it. That's it for this video essay. Let me know what you think in the comment below. There are links to other essays I did in the description as well. For now, that's all for this one, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!